Here is a number almost no one talks about: $13 trillion. That is roughly how much wealth the United States alone has created in a single generation through one mechanism. Not technology, not military power, not even democracy. A handshake. Or more precisely, a deal made in a hotel in New Hampshire in 1944 that most people have never heard of, between men most people could not name, about a problem most people did not yet know existed. And that deal, that single agreement hammered out over 3 weeks in a mountain resort while World War II was still being fought, became the invisible operating system of modern capitalism. It built the dollar into the most powerful financial instrument in human history. It created the institutions that still govern how money moves across the planet. And it contained one flaw, one quiet structural compromise that would eventually force the entire system to break and be rebuilt from scratch. Here is what they built. Here is how it cracked. And here is why it still shapes every dollar in your pocket today. The world before the deal. To understand what they created, you first have to understand what they were trying to escape. The world economy before 1944 was not simply unstable. It was catastrophically self-destructive. After World War I, the major powers returned to the gold standard, the old system where every currency was fixed to a specific quantity of gold, and international trade was settled in gold itself. The logic seemed sound. Gold is rare. Gold is neutral. No government can inflate it away. But there was a problem the theory never resolved. If gold is fixed, and economies grow at different speeds, and shocks hit different countries at different times, then the adjustment mechanism is brutal. When you run a trade deficit, gold flows out. When gold flows out, your money supply contracts. When your money supply contracts, your economy shrinks, wages fall, unemployment rises, and your government, constrained by gold, cannot do anything about it. You cannot print your way out. You cannot stimulate your way out. You just absorb the pain until the pain ends you. That is what the 1930s looked like at scale. The Great Depression was not simply a market correction. It was the gold standard doing exactly what it was designed to do, punishing imbalances with brutal mechanical precision, country after country, until global trade had collapsed by more than half and 1 in 4 Americans could not find work. And the political consequences did not stay economic. Desperate populations make desperate choices. By the mid-1930s, the architecture of the global order was fracturing. Nationalism was rising. Trade barriers were going up. Currencies were being devalued competitively, each country trying to export its unemployment to its neighbors. The technical term was beggar thy neighbor policy. The practical effect was that the international economy stopped functioning as an integrated system and started functioning as a collection of hostile fortresses. Everyone understood this had to be fixed. No one agreed on how. That argument ran for nearly a decade, and it was still running when the bombs started falling. The men in the room. By 1944, the outcome of the war was becoming clear. The Allies would win. And the question that now consumed certain very specific economists and policymakers was not how to win the war, it was how to design what came after it. 2 men dominated that conversation, and they could not have been more different. On one side was John Maynard Keynes, the most famous economist alive, representing Britain. Brilliant, imperious, already suffering from the heart disease that would kill him within 2 years. Keynes had spent his career arguing that economies were not self-correcting machines. They were human systems, prone to psychological spirals, in need of management. He believed the post-war monetary order had to be built around balance, that surplus countries had as much responsibility to adjust as deficit countries did. His proposal was bold. He wanted an entirely new international currency, something he called the Bancor, issued by a global central bank, used only for international settlement, not subject to any single nation's monetary policy. No country would dominate. Every country would have equal pressure to keep its trade roughly balanced. On the other side was Harry Dexter White, the American representative, a Treasury official from Massachusetts, less famous than Keynes, but arguably more powerful in that room, because of one simple fact: the United States was holding all the gold. After 2 world wars, American factories were intact, American farms were producing. American gold reserves represented roughly 2/3 of the entire world's monetary gold. The United States was not a country in need of rescue, it was the rescuer. And White understood what that meant. His plan was simpler and considerably more favorable to American interests. No new currency. Instead, fix all exchange rates to the dollar, and fix the dollar to gold at $35 per ounce. The world would have stability. The dollar would be the anchor, and the United States would be the anchor's keeper. The negotiations lasted 3 weeks. More than 40 countries participated. The outcome was never really in doubt. When Keynes's banker proposal died quietly in committee, he was reportedly devastated. He knew what had been chosen. Not a neutral international system, but an American-centered one. Stability, yes, but stability on American terms. The agreement was signed on the 22nd of July 1944. History would call it Bretton Woods. How the machine worked. What they built was, in theory, elegant. Every major currency would be pegged to the US dollar at a fixed exchange rate. The dollar itself would be convertible to gold at $35 per ounce, a fixed, guaranteed price. Countries holding dollars could, at any time, walk up to the American window and trade paper for metal. This created something the world had not had in decades: predictability. If you were a German exporter in 1955 shipping machinery to Brazil, you knew what your contract was worth in dollars. If you were a Japanese manufacturer importing American steel, you knew the exchange rate today would be the exchange rate tomorrow. The uncertainty that had paralyzed international trade, the fear that your trading partner might devalue their currency overnight and make your receivables worthless, was gone. The International Monetary Fund was created to manage temporary imbalances. The World Bank was created to finance reconstruction. And the dollar, backed by the largest gold reserve in history, became the world's reserve currency, the language in which global commerce was spoken. For nearly 2 decades, it worked extraordinarily well. The post-war global economy grew at rates that had never been seen before and have not been matched since. Western Europe recovered and then thrived. Japan transformed from devastation to industrial powerhouse. Trade volumes exploded. Living standards across the developed world rose faster than any economist had dared project. The deal worked. But Keynes had seen the flaw, and he had tried to warn them: the crack in the foundation. In 1960, an economist named Robert Triffin walked into a congressional hearing and said something that made the room uncomfortable. He laid out what would become known as the Triffin dilemma, and it went like this: the world needs dollars. If the dollar is the global reserve currency, every country on Earth needs to hold dollars for international transactions. The only way those dollars get into the world economy is if the United States runs trade deficits, spending more abroad than it earns. But if the United States runs persistent trade deficits, eventually the world holds more dollars than the United States holds gold to back them. And the moment that becomes obvious to everyone simultaneously, the moment confidence breaks, there would be a catastrophic run on American gold. Everyone would try to convert their dollars at once, and there would not be enough gold to honor the promise. The very success of the system was its poison. Triffin was right, and the numbers proved it faster than anyone had hoped. Through the 1950s and 1960s, American gold reserves fell steadily as dollars accumulated overseas. The Marshall Plan, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the vast expansion of American military commitments around the world, all of it pushed dollars outward. By the late 1960s, the gap between outstanding dollar liabilities and American gold reserves had become impossible to ignore. France, under Charles de Gaulle, began demanding gold for their dollar holdings. Others followed. The run Triffin had described was beginning in slow motion. And inside the Nixon White House, the pressure was becoming unbearable. On the 15th of August 1971, Richard Nixon went on television and announced that the United States was suspending gold convertibility. The dollar would no longer be exchangeable for gold. The Bretton Woods system, the agreement that had governed global finance for 27 years, was over. He called it temporary. It was permanent. What replaced it? Here is the part of the story that rarely gets told clearly. When Bretton Woods ended, the world did not return to the gold standard. It did not adopt Keynes's Bancor. It did not create a new international system through negotiation and treaty. It improvised. The dollar remained the world's reserve currency, but now unbacked by anything except trust in the American economy and, crucially, one new agreement that was never formally announced as an agreement at all. In the early 1970s, the Nixon administration and then the Ford administration quietly negotiated with Saudi Arabia. The deal was straightforward. Saudi Arabia would price its oil exclusively in US dollars. Other OPEC members would follow. In exchange, the United States would provide military protection and arms. Oil was the one thing every economy on Earth needed. If oil could only be bought in dollars, every country on Earth needed to hold dollars. The petrodollar system replaced the gold-backed dollar, not through a Bretton Woods-style international conference, but through a bilateral agreement that was kept out of the headlines for decades. The dollar's dominance was preserved. But the mechanism had changed fundamentally. Under Bretton Woods, the dollar's value was anchored to something real and fixed. Under the petrodollar system, the dollar's value was anchored to geopolitical arrangements and, ultimately, to the global perception that the United States would remain dominant enough for the arrangement to hold. Faith replaced metal. And faith, unlike gold, can be manufactured. It can also evaporate. The inheritance. What does this history actually mean in practical terms today? It means that the system governing international trade and finance was not designed by markets. It was designed by men under wartime pressure, making compromises between national interests, trying to prevent a repeat of the catastrophe they had just survived. It means that the US dollar's reserve status, the phenomenon that allows the United States to borrow cheaply, run enormous deficits without immediate punishment, and export inflation to its trading partners is not a natural law. It is an arrangement, one that has proven durable, but not eternal. Every major reserve currency in history has eventually been replaced. The Portuguese real, the Spanish peso, the Dutch guilder, the British pound. Each one seemed permanent until it wasn't. The Triffin dilemma has not been solved. It has been suspended. The United States still runs the structural deficits that Triffin predicted were necessary, but ultimately destabilizing. Global dollar liabilities still vastly exceed any realistic backing. The question of what anchors confidence in the dollar is increasingly answered with circular logic. The dollar is trusted because it has always been trusted. Meanwhile, the institutions Bretton Woods created the IMF, the World Bank, the framework of fixed exchange rates that later evolved into managed floats, remain central to how the global economy functions. They were built for a world that no longer exists, and they have adapted with varying degrees of success to a world their architects never imagined. The SWIFT payment system, the primacy of the dollar in commodity markets, the ability of the U.S. Federal Reserve's decisions to send shockwaves through economies on the other side of the planet. These are all downstream consequences of what 44 countries agreed to in a New Hampshire hotel in the summer of 1944. Here is what stays with you when you trace this story back to its source. The men who built Bretton Woods were not naive idealists. They were pragmatists who had watched ideology destroy the world economy once already, and they were trying to build something that would survive contact with reality. What they created was not perfect. Keynes knew it was not perfect. Triffin would later prove it mathematically. But it was better than what came before, and the institutions it spawned flawed, politically compromised, often criticized with justification, have presided over the longest stretch of non-catastrophic global trade in recorded history. The question now is whether the arrangement is approaching the kind of structural limit that Triffin described, whether the faith that replaced the gold is starting to thin at the edges. The rise of alternative reserve currencies, digital settlement systems, and bilateral trade agreements denominated in non-dollar currencies suggests that at least some countries are quietly hedging that question. The men in New Hampshire thought they were solving the problem of money. What they actually did was defer it very skillfully, for a very long time. Whether the deferral ends quietly or loudly is one of the genuinely open questions of the next 20 years. The deal made in 1944 created modern capitalism as we know it. What comes next is still being negotiated.